In this video, we're continuing our look at the shaders in Blender, and right now I set the first one to a refraction material, which we can set again that index of refraction. It's very similar to glass. I'm actually not sure how it's different from the glass texture, because to me the settings are the same and very similar, but you can experiment around with that. I'm going to change this one again to another material, so I'm going to go down to where it says subsurface scattering, and subsurface scattering is where the light penetrates the surface and it's scattered inside. They realized in working on earlier photorealistic renders that something was wrong with it, and part of what they realized was that light doesn't just reflect off the surface of an object, it actually penetrates into the object and it scatters underneath the surface. That results in, for different materials, like for instance like the wax in candles, it goes quite deep into it and scatters quite far, and that's partly why you can see candlelight glow through wax. Also, even things like marble countertops will absorb and scatter the light a little bit. Most often on a lot of things we don't need to use subsurface scattering, and it might not be critical to what we're making at all. So in cases like that, it might not be worth the extra calculations of doing the subsurface scattering. However, over on the side here, there are more materials that we're working with than just what they show over here, where they have scale with radius. So I click on this, I can see more options, and actually I think if I resize this, maybe, nope. Well, let me resize it vertically, but over on the side I can see all three radiuses just kind of laid out there for me, and so there's some different settings there to play with. Again, pretty much every material will do some level of subsurface scattering. Most time it's not going to change things that much by adding it, and it will increase the calculations that the computer is doing to render that. We're going to go ahead and change this one to this one that says Toon BSDF, and this is for doing cell shading. And so, for instance, if I have a 3D scene that I created and I want it to look more like an animation, I can use that to create this. There's also some subsettings there as well. I can choose glossy, or I can choose diffuse, and so it gives me just a couple options. And it can be a fun one to play with, especially if you like more of the drawing type renderings and things like that. So again, continuing down the list, I'm going to go to where it says translucent, and on this one, if it doesn't do really well with the sphere, I can see a little bit of the light coming off of it there, but if I go to our cube in the background here, and let's change this one to translucent, and if I go out of the camera view and I just kind of rotate underneath, I can see both the shadows and the objects through that material, and it gives me just a little bit to play with there and how that's working in lighting. Let's undo that. And there's also a velvet one. I've never really played around with that, but just trying to mimic a little bit how some different materials work. Volume absorption and volume scatter are going to do different things, and when you use those, you usually want to plug in to the volume channel, and there you can see you got a little clouded object that's supposed to represent a volume material. So those will all work a little bit different, and part of that is going in and just working on creating different shader properties. You can mix different shaders together, and so part of the way you could do that, for instance, in fact, if I wanted to, I could actually have a surface and a volume, but I'm not sure. I think the surface would override the volume. So to start playing around with mixing some of them, if you do Shift A, you can go down to where it says Shader, do Add Shader, and if you drop this right over the line, you'll see the line kind of highlight. Drop it in, and actually I didn't want Add Shader, I want Mix Shader. So Shift A, and then if I go down to where it says Shader and Mix Shader, then I can put that right between, and I can add that in, connect those dots, and you can get some different color and screens there of different things happening. And so, and if I do Shift A again, and I'm going to add a, let's say, glass shader, and I put this in. Let's change this one from volume to Shift A. I'm going to add let's add a glossy shader to it. Then you can plug those both in, and you can get both of them having an effect on it. You can slide this back and forth. Now it's all on the glass shader. And if I slide it the other way, it's all on the glossy shader. And you can change the amount of reflection that it has. But this way you can mix different materials to get different effects for it. So play around with that. In the next video we'll cover texturing a little bit and adding some procedural textures.